Welcome to Look Ahead Radio with Tom Arms and Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints around the world for this hour with Tom Arms joining us from London with Look Ahead Radio, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. Before we get started, I just want to remind you about the phone numbers. 252 area code 247-7282. That's 247-7282. 910 area code of our listening audience 353-4674. That's 353-4674. Toll free 800-818-2255 via email at viewpointsradio@hotmail.com and via Facebook at Viewpoints on the Talk Station. We've got a piece that was sent to us last week following our conversation. We'll get to that a little later on in the program. But first, welcome, Tom. Good evening to you.
Good evening to you, Lockwood.
And how are things in London? How's the weather?
We had some rain.
Oh.
We had some rain. And it's very humid here, actually. It's sticky for a change. It's very rare that it gets humid and sticky here in London. But we had some rain at the weekend, a couple of days of rain. The weather today has been really nice, but we're expecting some more rain. We're starting to get into the fall, into autumn.
By the way, with autumn, does that usually bring more rain and obviously more cooler temperatures?
Yes, definitely. I mean, winter starts a bit earlier here. And when it does, it's like the sky drops to about 10 feet above your head, and then it's colored lead.
Yeah, it's foggy to say the least. All right.
It's not foggy. It's really? The great London fogs are a thing of the past, because those weren't fogs, those were smogs.
Oh.
No, it's just sort of dull and gray.
Very interesting. Okay. Well, let's talk now about the events of the past week. And as a matter of fact, as we get started, let's start with a question. We had a caller related to the question on the Ganges River in India. Britain has suffered serious flooding in the recent years, but the Ganges floods of more than 50 meters take such disasters to, quote, literally new heights. Do people around the world fully appreciate the enormity of such events? This sent to us by Stuart Birch of Suffolk, England, no less. But let's talk about this. This is, of course, having to do with, if you will, global climate change. And I don't know really what we can do about it, but we'll chat about that as well. What's your thoughts?
We have listeners in Suffolk, England. That's great.
We're streaming everywhere around the world. And, of course, it's being heard precisely on radio stations across the country as well. So what about this?
Well, it's very interesting, because this week we are having the inaugural meeting of the International Mayors Conference in The Hague in Amsterdam. And this is one of the issues which is coming up. There can be 75 cities represented. Now, as you probably know, most of the major world cities are built either on the ocean or on ports or harbors, or they're built on large rivers so that ships can get in or could have gotten in the past. And everyone these days either wants to have a house or they want to have an office overlooking water, which means that all the banks which acted as floodplains in the past have now been concreted over. So when it rains, the water is no longer absorbed by the land around the river. Right. It simply goes straight into it.
Impervious surface, we call it here in the States.
Impervious surface.
That's right.
And so in these big cities and in the small towns as well now, you're getting more and more flooding right around the world. And that's going to be a major issue at this conference. And I think it's going to be a major issue for a long time to come, because they reckon that by about 2050, 90% of the world's population is going to be living in cities.
Well, they're going to be living close to water as well, and I mean that not to be flippant. All right, Tom, this is mayors that will be meeting in The Hague, is that correct?
75 major cities around the world.
And
it's the inaugural Parliament of Mayors, International Parliament of Mayors.
What can mayors do to solve this problem, just out of curiosity?
Well, I mean, they're responsible for the planning laws. So what they've got to do is try and, figure out a way to create floodplains or something.
By the way, we have done that here in the States. We have been working on this now for many years. Recent hurricane events, particularly Katrina, but also in North Carolina, Hurricane Floyd, and then the events recently with Superstorm Sandy have caught the attention of FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Administration, and in the process we've seen flood maps being developed which determine what properties, structures, and properties are in flood zones. And this, of course, directly impacts insurance premiums. What about there in Europe? Is that do you have flood insurance, and do you have?
Yes, you do. And if you have a house which is built on a floodplain or too near a floodplain, it's very difficult to get insurance for it. Now, of course, in the United States, you have a lot more land.
Right.
Here in England, we're a very overcrowded island. In the same places like Holland, India, and so forth, where there's a lot more congestion in terms of people, they're more tightly packed. It's a bit more difficult to make room for the floodplains and the water.
And you mentioned Holland, and I just want to make mention of this before we go to the break. Holland and Germany have determined they will not retreat. According to folks I've talked to, have determined they're going to stand firm and, if necessary, build higher dikes. What about that in other areas of Europe? Any similar conversations?
I don't know about other areas of Europe. The problem with building dikes, of course, is, that acts to a certain degree, but everything has consequences. Right. So if you build the dikes, the water has to go somewhere.
All right, we're going to get back to this conversation with Tom Arms of LookAhead Radio, and we're going to start off with, right after we return from this break, the Brexit watch. What's the future with Britain exiting the EU? We're seeing growing distrust and dissatisfaction with the European Union. Tom, please clarify that for us right after this commercial break here on Viewpoints Around the World with Tom Arms and Lockwood Phillips.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment.
This is Tom Arms with the World Report of LookAheadNews.com for the week beginning the 12th of September. Look Ahead broadcasts tomorrow's news today so that you can plan to participate. EU leaders meet in Bratislava next weekend to hammer out the bones of a deal with departing Britain and a political and economic strategy for the remaining members of the European Union. Earlier in the week on Wednesday, European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker sets the agenda summit with his State of the Union address to the European Parliament in Strasbourg. In Britain, the party which played a major role in persuading voters to leave Europe, the UK Independence Party, meets to elect a new leader. In the US, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee retreats behind closed doors for secret briefings on the recent failed coup in Turkey and its impact on the region and US-Turkish relations. At the same time, Myanmar Foreign Minister Aung San Suu Kyi arrives in Washington for 2 days of talks with President Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry on lifting sanctions against her country. Back to Europe, and there are parliamentary elections in Russia and state elections in Berlin. In Spain, 24 women activists set sail from Barcelona for Gaza to try and break the Israeli naval blockade of the Palestinian territory. They leave on Wednesday and are expected to arrive on the 1st of October. Oliver Stone on Friday releases a film on controversial whistleblower Edward Snowden and previews the release on Wednesday with a video-linked interview with Snowden that will be shown live in 700 American movie theaters. And finally, 6 million beer drinkers are set to descend on the Bavarian capital of Munich for the annual Oktoberfest. The first keg is tapped by Mayor Dieter Reiter at noon next Saturday. And that was next week's News Today from LookAheadNews.com. Stay tuned after this message for the expanded Look Ahead World Analysis.
Quick, what do these sounds have in common? These are the sounds of geography. Geography helps us understand connections between people and places. But our kids aren't getting enough of it. Half can't locate Japan or India, and 20% can't even find the Pacific Ocean. So we created MyWonderfulWorld.org to give kids the power of global knowledge. Go to MyWonderfulWorld.org to learn more. It's a wonderful world.
This is Tom Arms with the expanded world analysis from LookAheadNews.com for the week beginning the 12th of September. Look Ahead News broadcasts tomorrow's news today so that you can plan to participate. Worried European leaders gather in the Slovak capital Bratislava to discuss the post-Brexit world. What impact will Britain's decision to leave Europe have on the euro, the EU budget, and other countries' Eurosceptic movements? Is Brexit an opportunity for the remaining members to move towards closer political union, or the beginning of the end for the European Union? What are the red lines that need to be drawn in the upcoming withdrawal negotiations with Britain? European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker will attempt to set the tone and direction of the summit with his State of the Union address to the European Parliament on Wednesday. But the real decisions will be made by German Chancellor Angela Merkel. The British will be watching the summit closely. They will also be keeping a close eye on the annual conference of the United Kingdom Independence Party, which next week elects a new leader. Although it has only one seat in the House of Commons, UKIP played a major role in persuading Britons to vote against the EU. Job done. Leader Nigel Farage quit his leadership post to concentrate on persuading other European countries to follow the British lead. Turkey is now a major headache as Washington tries to balance the need to retain an important ally with outrage against the government's human rights abuses. Next Monday, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee starts 2 days of closed sessions to discuss the recent failed coup in Turkey and how to repair strained U.S.-Turkish relations while not caving in to the demands of President Erdogan. Down the road in the White House, President Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry meet with Myanmar's Aung San Suu Kyi about lifting U.S. sanctions against her country. The sanctions were partially lifted after Aung San Suu Kyi's landslide election victory last year. However, restrictions on business people connected with the former military rulers remained in place to encourage the transition to civilian rule. Next week sees parliamentary elections in Russia and state elections in Berlin. Putin's United Russia Party will win big in the parliamentary elections as primaries held early in the year eliminated most of the opposition. The Berlin elections will be watched closely for any further advances by the anti-immigrant and Eurosceptic party, the Alternative for Deutschland. It recently pushed Angela Merkel's ruling CDU party into third place in elections in Mrs. Merkel's home state of Saxony-Anhalt. Israel has enforced a naval blockade on the Gaza Strip since shortly after Hamas took control of the Palestinian territory in 2006. Several humanitarian aid convoys have been turned back, and in one case 9 passengers were killed. On Wednesday, a ship crewed by 24 women leaves Barcelona for another attempt to break the blockade. And that was next week's News Today from LookAheadNews.com. Stay tuned for viewpoints around the world with myself and Lockwood Phillips.
Welcome back to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints on the talk station FM 107 AM 1240 and Viewpoints around the world with Tom Arms joining us this evening from London. Tom, before we get on to the issue of Brexit, we've got a caller standing by. I want to get Gary in Oriental on the line with us. Gary, good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Lockwood. Hi, Tom. I've got a question for you, and I'm sure this is going to come up. Lockwood and I were talking the other day about the presidential debates in the United States against Hillary and Trump. And I had said that I think it's going to be probably the most widely viewed show in U.S. history. Mm-hmm. In England, how does that work over there? Are they that enthralled with it? And do you feel that there's going to be a very widely watched debate?
Oh, yes. Yes, it's definitely going to be watched. No, and followed very closely. I happen to know for a fact that there's going to be a party, both Republicans abroad, that is Americans here in London who are Republicans, and Democrats abroad are having parties, and they're going to book huge halls where they'll be able to screen the debates live. And I think the Democrats abroad are talking about having 7,000 people.
No kidding. Now, over in England, are they more, in your opinion, are they more in favor of Trump or more in favor of Clinton?
Clinton.
Really?
Overwhelming.
Really, I find that rather interesting, considering you've got such a huge immigration problem over there and the no-go zones and stuff like that. I would have thought otherwise.
I think you find if you really look into the no-go zones that that's not really the case. And yes, we do have an immigration problem, but you know, most people just don't like the way Trump presents himself.
I could see that. I have a lot of friends that are English. I could see that. You folks are pretty, you're pretty level, pretty straight, you know.
No, Gary. Let's not go overboard. But it is interesting. it's really the form of the campaign rather than the real meat and potatoes of the campaign, in our opinion. By the way, Gary, I want to ask a question of Tom. Tom, again, the story, we mentioned this last week, related to the close association of donors associated with the visits with the Secretary of State, and of course concerns now that Bill Clinton is going to remain until the election as head of the foundation. Has any of that resonated in either UK or the United Kingdom or the rest of Europe by any chance?
I really haven't seen it, no.
That is interesting. Gary, I appreciate your call on that one. Thanks for bringing that up. And you've gotten him out of Tom something that I was not aware of, and that is how focused the expats are on this race as well. And I guess a lot of a lot of folks from the UK will be attending. Gary, thanks very much for your call. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Lockwood. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Gary.
Tom, let's continue on with Brexit for a moment, and then I want to get on to two other items before our next break. What is the future of the British exit from the EU, and what has been the residual impact? I'm seeing very interesting stories that there are countries in Europe that are growing equally frustrated with the European Union.
Oh, yes, definitely. But this week, we've had a couple of things happen here in the UK. One is that immigration, which was the major issue of the Brexit campaign, is Theresa May has rejected the introduction of a points-based system as a means of controlling immigration. And this was a key promise of the Brexiteers. Instead of that, she wants a work permit-based system whereby people are required to have a secure job before being allowed into the country. And she's also said that Britain would only be able to get, quote, some elements of control over immigration.
Wow.
And so expect the same levels of immigration, that reading between the lines. Ooh. The other thing she said, another key campaign issue in the referendum, was that the money that would be spent or saved, the money that would be saved by leaving the EU would be spent on the National Health Service. And the National Health Service here is a real sacred cow. And if anyone wants to win votes, they say, let's cut something that you don't like and spend it on the National Health Service. And so that's what the Brexiteers did. And Theresa May has come out and said, if we save any money, it's not going to be spent on the National Health Service.
Wow. Okay. So she is a contrarian. Let's talk about other items. I see a story here about Black Lives Matter comes to the United Kingdom. Excuse me?
Yes, it's here. They're out there. They're campaigning. They've been demonstrating civil disobedience, linking their arms together in the street and lying down and attaching their arms with concrete sleeves so they can't be easily moved. And it's become quite big here now in the last few weeks. For some reason, they've focused on Heathrow and city airports and plans to increase air traffic there because they say it affects pollution around black neighborhoods. But Britain has a problem with race, just like the U.S. does, just like other countries do. And in fact, the problem here is probably greater in many respects than what it is in the U.S. Half of the street crime in London is committed by young blacks, and they make up only 12% of the population. In fact, actually, the young black males probably only make up about 5 or 6% of the population, but they're responsible for half of the recorded street crime in London.
This is a stunning story. We have gotten very little stories about. I've not seen this anywhere in national press. Tom, how are the British officials responding to this? And is it only unique to predominantly London and the large urban areas, or is it also, you've got other cities like Manchester? And the other question is it also appearing in other countries, France, Germany, Spain?
I haven't seen Black Lives Matter cropping up in other countries in Europe, not yet anyway, but it's not confined to London. They've had demonstrations in Birmingham, Manchester, and Nottingham as well. They take the form of civil disobedience.
Well, how are they? I mean, what exactly are they looking for? We've got about a minute to go. What exactly is the protest?
The same things. They're angry about the police stopping and searching them. They're much more likely to be stopped and searched than a white person. They're angry at what they regard as prejudice against them.
And now, one quick question.
So they're demonstrating.
Another quick question again. We've got other ethnic groups in London. Are they equally concerned, or is this predominantly African? Well, we call it African American. Black.
It's predominantly Afro-Caribbean and African descent.
Wow.
In this country. In this country, the Asian and the Indian, I should say, the Indian and the Chinese communities actually do very well. A good barometer of this would be how they do at school. And the Indian and the Chinese do extraordinarily well with the results in school.
All right.
The two bottom people or groups are white working class men and blacks.
All right. We're going to get back to this story in a moment with Tom Arms.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment.
They say the best things in life are free. So, hey, why are we paying so much for our basic information and entertainment needs? The average cable TV bill has more than doubled in the last 10 years. The price of movie tickets keeps going up. So, exactly what is free today anyway? Well, you're listening to it. Local radio. Support the advertisers that support this radio station. And keep listening. We won't send you a bill. There are still some things you just shouldn't have to pay for.
We now return to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints around the world with your host, Tom Arms of Look Ahead Radio. Lockwood Phillips here in the studio with Ross, our producer. And we're just finding out from Tom that Black Lives Matter has come to the United Kingdom. Really a stunning story. Did not know anything about it. Let's look at other issues associated with culture and a topic associated also with the issue of concerns related to immigration. British imprisons Islamic preacher who radicalized Americans. This is an interesting story. We covered this nationally last week. It was very intense. Tell us something about this, Tom.
Well, it's Anjam Chowdhury. Now, Anjam Chowdhury has been imprisoned. He's been sort of skirting, he's been preaching for over 20 years now about the introduction of Sharia law. That's been his big thing. He wants to have Sharia law all around the world because he says all man-made laws are irrelevant and bad. That only Sharia law is right because it's God's law, at least according to him. At any rate, he finally, the police have been watching him for some time, and he finally stepped over the bounds. They caught him on Skype swearing allegiance to ISIS. And he was doing this in a London restaurant, and he ended up in court, and he's been sentenced to 5.5 years. Now, I think what's interesting, what's come out since he was sentenced, is that he has been, from London, radicalizing people in America.
Right.
And there's one young chap called Jesse Morton, who's 37, and he says he was radicalized by Chowdhury through an organization called Islamic Thinkers Worldwide, and was heavily involved with him and was planning to conduct terrorist activities and everything else. He was arrested. He turned state's evidence, and some of his evidence was used to help put Chowdhury behind bars, as well as some other people. He has now been de-radicalized and is working as a research academic at GW University.
George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Very interesting. Yes. All right, Tom, let's stick with this story. I want to get on to another issue here in a few moments related to a topic here in the States. We've not had a chance to talk about it, but I just want to get your quick observation. We'll do that a little later on. Let's go to the issue of France. I read with interest yesterday and today that there are French communities, particularly in the area of Calais. I think these were farmers who are, in essence, blocking the road to stop refugees from transit. Tell us about this. And
it's farmers and long-distance truck drivers.
Okay, right.
Now, outside of Calais, which is just on the other side of the English Channel from England, outside of Calais, they have a camp called The Jungle. And I think it's about 7,000 refugees are crammed into this tiny little refugee camp, all trying to get into the UK. And the UK won't let them in.
Right.
Or if they do, it's going to be very slowly, one at a time, like one this week, one next week, that sort of thing. They're very reluctant to let them in. And so the French are having to put up with them. These refugees are doing everything they can to get in the UK. They're trying to walk through the Channel Tunnel. One of them succeeded. They are trying to stow away on long-distance trucks, which then either go through the Channel Tunnel on trains or they go across the English Channel on ferries.
Why are the French trying to stop the refugees from getting to Great Britain?
They don't want to. In fact, that's they would love these refugees to go, but they'd signed an agreement with the British, and it's called the Le Touquet Agreement between the French and British government, which says that they will look after these refugees until Britain decides whether or not they want them.
Is there a chance that these refugees could be repatriated to their original country?
Well, I suppose it's an outside chance, but under EU law, no. They're more or less stuck where they are. They're not happy, and the farmers are objecting because, of course, these people run out of food, and they go out and steal it from the farms.
Well,
the truck drivers, what they're complaining about is all these refugees hiding out in their trucks. And so that's why they staged their demonstration. And what's happening now is that the British are going to build a wall between the road, or fence, I should say. They're going to build a fence a la Trump between the refugee camp and the road, so that the refugees can't get to the road to jump onto the back of international trucks.
I'm beginning to think that maybe more Europeans are beginning to see the value and the importance of Donald Trump. Of course, our program today of Viewpoints Around the World with Tom Arms of LookAhead Radio. Tom, that's an interesting story. I want to go quickly to the situation in Germany and regional elections there. What's happening? And Angela Merkel seems she's having some challenges. How successful is her bid for a potential re-election?
Well, she hadn't decided yet whether she wants to stand for re-election. But at the moment, everyone is saying she's having problems, but she would probably be re-elected if she would have elections now. Her popularity rating is still hovering around the 50% level, which should be enough to have her return to office. Having said that, they had state elections in her home state, and the right-wing Alternative for Deutschland party, which is very much opposed to the EU and extremely opposed to her policy on immigration, picked up a lot of seats. In fact, her party was pushed into third place behind the Alternative for Deutschland. And it was that is a big thing. It's a very big thing. And both the CDU, a lot of people in the CDU party, which is the Christian Democratic Union Party, which is Angela Merkel's party, and her partners in the Christian Social Union are saying she has to rethink her immigration policy. There are going to be another set of state elections this next weekend, 10 days' time in Berlin, and that will be watched very carefully.
All right. We've got a caller standing by, I think, wants to talk to us about this. Dennis in Jacksonville joining us. Dennis, of course, Tom Arms with us. Dennis, welcome.
Well, unfortunately, I'm not right on topic, but I just had a question for Tom.
Go for it.
In Great Britain, with your political parties, I was just wondering, do the minorities there vote in one particular party in greatly high percentages like they do here, or is it more spread out?
Yes, they vote for the Labour Party.
Which, of course, is the Liberal Party for the...
Well, there's a Liberal Democratic Party. It's, let's say the Lib Dems are closer to the Democrats in America, and the Labour Party is closer to Bernie Sanders.
Socialism. Yeah, okay. Dennis, that's an interesting question. Your thoughts before we wrap it up with you, Dennis?
I don't know if I had thoughts. I was just wondering because it seems that it's used as a wedge here. Because a lot of times I'll hear about the Republican Party and the blame will be placed on the Republican Party as to why there aren't minorities. And I tend to reverse the question, which is why aren't more minorities interested in a conservative or a Republican type of government as opposed to a more, like if you put a scale, a more socialist government?
A government more focused on jobs rather than centralized planning.
Yeah, well, certainly in this country, the conservative government tends to cut back welfare spending, which the minorities have become dependent upon. So, they cut back the welfare spending. They don't give them the jobs at the same time. And so they end up substantially worse off if there's a conservative government than if there is a left-wing government. I should think it's probably similar with in the United States.
No, as a matter of fact, we've been covering with a great deal of interest here in North Carolina, Tom, where the Republican legislature and governor have actually done more to promote more jobs and, in the same breath, cut taxes. And we've seen this in other states as well.
But do they also reduce spending on welfare?
Let's put it this way. They have been more strategic in the spending on welfare and giving...
Because it's usually a lag time between cutting spending on welfare and creating the job.
No. North Carolina has done this through basically the removal of a lot of unnecessary regulations.
The reason I asked it because one of the things that I think, if you want to go back to civil rights and go as far back as slavery, I think because now it kind of pulls it together. I never thought to ask the question before, but when you take a whole group of people whose existence was primarily through slavery, and then you eventually move them to a state of freedom, if they've then not been truly taught what it means to be capitalistic and what it means to operate in an economy where it is completely relied on you, where would they learn that from?
Well,
where does that education come from?
Dennis, I'm going to counter that with you with this observation before we go to the break. Immediately following the Civil War, I think many blacks were competitive. They were interested in predominantly agrarian communities, but they were very active entrepreneurially. I will have to say that, sadly, this country did a lot to stymie that effort. We've seen instances, and there's a great story about the riots in St. Louis, Missouri, for example, following the Civil War. We're talking about whole black communities that were very successful. We're reaping what we sowed as a result of that. Dennis, I've got to go to a break, but that's a very good question. Thank you very much for calling. All right, we've got other callers standing by. We're going to get to them in a few moments. We have Tom Arms of LookAhead Radio joining us. You're listening to Viewpoints Around the World.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment.
Observations of an Expat by Tom Arms. Bye-bye, Kurds. That's the realpolitik message expected to be issued soon by the White House to one of the world's saddest nationalities. It may not be as explicit as that, but the meaning will be clear. According to Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, well-known scourge of the Kurds, he has suggested to President Barack Obama that America and Turkey join forces to crush the terrorists in Syria. Obama's mulling it over. The problem is that in Washington, terrorist means ISIS. In Ankara, it means Kurds. The Kurds have been around as an entity since the 10th century. Their ranks include the chivalrous Muslim crusader Saladin, much respected arch-foe of Richard the Lionhearted. In the 13th century, they merited a positive mention in Marco Polo's travelogues when he passed through on his way to China. Throughout history, they've had the misfortune to occupy a squeezed, landlocked plot between Turkey, Persia, and whomever sat in Baghdad. This basically meant a constant round of battles as Kurdish leaders sided with one empire or the other. But in between battles, the Kurds were pretty much left to their own devices until the 20th century. In common with the rest of the world, the Kurds suffered an acute bout of nationalism. Unfortunately, so did their larger neighbours. During World War I, the Kurds sided with the British against the Ottoman Empire. In return, the then world's greatest power promised to act as guarantors of Kurdish freedom, a promise they broke, and the Kurds entered a 100-year struggle against suppression of their language, cultural identity, and political freedom against Turkish, Iranian, Syrian, and Iraqi governments. Particularly tiresome was Turkey, where half of the world's Kurds live. Then came the U.S.-led Second Iraq War, the Syrian Civil War, the establishment of the Caliphate, and the West's battle against ISIS. This was another opportunity for the Kurds to ally themselves with the newest world's greatest power. After the debacle of Iraq, President Obama has been understandably wary of committing American ground forces in the battle against ISIS. But one of the military truths is that airstrikes, missile strikes, and blockades do not on their own win wars. As soon as the airstrike starts, the besieged fighters simply go underground and re-emerge to fight again when the planes fly away. To win, you need boots on the ground. The Kurds offered proxy boots. The Western-supplied Kurdish fighters have done a reasonable, but not definitive job. Meanwhile, Turkey has seethed. How could their long-standing chief NATO ally back a group that wants to carve out a huge chunk of southeastern Turkey and call it their own? Then came the failed military coup. How dare the US and EU criticize Erdogan's human rights record? Why won't they extradite back to Turkey whomever Erdogan demands? Where are the messages of support? So, Erdogan flies to Moscow to meet with Putin, just to show that he's not afraid to find new friends. Military chiefs, Kerry, Biden, in ascending order, were all hastily dispatched to Ankara to mend fences. The fact is that the U.S. needs Turkey more than it needs the Kurds. The kiss of death for the Kurds was Erdogan's decision on August 24th to climb off the fence in the Syrian civil war and the battle against ISIS. On that day, after another ISIS suicide bombing in Turkey, he ordered Turkish tanks across the Syrian border. Washington has to think geopolitically. It cannot afford to make Kurdish autonomy their objective unless that autonomy is vital to the larger objective of the defeat of ISIS and the retention of U.S. influence in the Middle East. An army of 2,533 state-of-the-art tanks, backed by 610,000 troops, are much more likely to achieve that aim than 200,000 Kurdish guerrilla fighters. And the Kurds? Well, they would be well advised to carefully consider Psalm 146, verse 3 of the King James Bible. Put not your faith in princes.
Welcome back to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints around the world with Tom Arms of Look Ahead Radio. Tom, I've just got to reference something I made mention to Dennis a few moments ago, and we're going to get Lisa on the line with us. I think we are still paying the penalty not of slavery, but of a failed Reconstruction. And as a result of, quite frankly, politics and, sadly, Democrat politics, we have dealt a severe blow to race relations in this country. I hearken back to what I was chatting with Dennis about, the East St. Louis race riots of 1917, and there were other instances, particularly in urban markets, where whole African American or black communities were devastated, and government did little to correct that situation. We'll not get into history today, but I just wanted to make mention of that, Tom. We've got a caller. We've got Lisa in Morehead City joining us. Lisa, good evening.
Hello, Mr. Arms. How are you? I think this is the first time we've spoken.
I'm very well, thanks.
It's so funny because last night I was up all night trying to find a TV station. I've got a friend online. His name's Stephen Winstone, and he is with one of the parties, the Labor Party's, not the Labor Party, I'm sorry, the more right-wing party, MP, that was with the Brexit thing. And I still get emails from Nigel because I knew about Brexit way long before they were talking about it here.
Right.
So anyway, I saw last night that Keith Vaz had gotten into trouble, and I wanted to know, had he stepped down?
Yes, he has.
Okay. All right.
He has resigned.
Okay.
He has resigned in a sex scandal.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
You know, that's torn down more political titans in England than any other scandal, sex scandals. Go ahead, Lisa.
Well, yeah, and then the other thing I wanted to say is Lockwood doesn't know this because he's got too much money and he's not old enough to be retired.
Thank you.
But you were talking about the welfare thing, and I've been looking into that too because I know that we cannot afford all the refugee money. And I know, like in Sweden or some places, like 80% of the refugees that have been there for a while, 10 years or longer, are still on welfare. And then they divorce their wives. And then there's some countries in England that are saying, okay, if you have 2 or 3 wives, we'll go ahead and pay for all the kids for each wife. They're changing the laws. But I know we're absorbing so much cost with the refugees. What they've done so far here, and Paul Ryan is a big champion of the Ayn Rand philosophy, that we just shouldn't have a social net. Now, he has said that out loud years ago, and it's on tape at the Ayn Rand Society. But what they have done is they've cut Medicare reimbursements and basically lower or raise the cost that you pay for medication. And we know that's going to get worse with the TPP because the pharmaceutical companies are going to be able to not have to let loose of their patent after 10 years.
So in essence, Lisa...
So what we're... And for the first time in 40 years, there's been 2 times, at least since we've been retired, that Social Security has received no increase in the cost of living.
Right. Lisa, thank you very much for the call. I appreciate that. We'll probably bring this up next week. Lisa, of course, from Morton City joining us. I want to thank...
Can I just make one correction?
Please.
They do not... polygamy is illegal here in the UK. They will not allow people to bring in 2 or 3 wives.
All right. Tom Arms with us, of course, with Viewpoints Around the World and also with Look Ahead Radio.
Look Ahead Radio is a production of the Talk Station.